So since the universe came into being, there are 4 logical explanations to explain why. And this is based on the Quran, by the way. Chapter 52, verse 35 to 36. What are the logical implications? What are the logical possible explanations? Number 1, since the universe began, it emerged, it was created from or via nothing. Number 2, it created itself. Number 3, it was created by something else created. Or number 4, it was created by something uncreated. So let's address the first point. If the universe came into being, it was created, it emerged, whatever language you want to use, could it come from nothing? Of course not, because metaphysically, as a principle, regardless of empirical justification, when you have nothing with a little bit more of nothing and a little bit more of nothing, all you're going to have is nothing. And what we mean by nothing is the absence of something or the absence of the thing that we're talking about. Because we do have the likes of Professor Lawrence Krauss, who wrote the book, The Universe from Nothing. But his nothing actually means something, by the way. As he says in his lecture, my nothing is something physical. A bit bizarre, isn't it? It's like me coming here and saying, last night I had an amazing meal, and it was nothing. It doesn't make sense. It's what I would call linguistic gymnastics. And he even says in his book that he may not have enough empirical justification to what he's talking about, that essentially it's just plausibility, and that he's changed the word nothing to mean something, which is no time and space, but there is something, and it's physical. Confused? Well done. That means you have a correct mindset. You have an intellect. So it's not that nothing that we're talking about. But some people may argue, wait a minute, you have these quantum physicists and these atheists who think they know quantum physics, and they say something can come from nothing. You have subatomic happenings or particles emerging from a quantum vacuum. If you don't know what the quantum vacuum is, just imagine this. I have a cosmic Hoover and I suck away all particles in the universe. What's left would be the vacuum, okay? And they say that nothingness, you have things emerging. Frankly, this is a mistake, because the quantum vacuum is something. It's a rich structure, it obeys the laws of the universe, and it is a sea of fluctuating energy. So it's something. So we can say the universe couldn't come from nothing. The second point, could the universe create itself? Or to use philosophical language, non-religious language, could the universe come into being by its own being? This is impossible, right? Let me make you understand this with a question. Could your mother give birth to herself? It's a very messy idea, I appreciate. It's impossible. Because that implies that she was in existence and not in existence at the same time. Because to say the universe came into being by its own being, it means it was not there before it was there because it began, but it was actually there before it wasn't there in order for it to be there after it wasn't there. Confused? Exactly. Now, you do have some biological arguments. I had an interesting discussion in Birmingham University with the head of the British Humanist Association, and I gave him this argument, and he said, look, you're wrong. The universe can create itself. And he said, look at asexual reproduction in biology. You have a single cell, and it splits. And I started to laugh. Hopefully not out of arrogance, because I said, your example has justified our position. 2 points. The single cell, in order for it to split, it requires energy outside of itself. So for the universe to appear, it requires energy outside of itself. The second point is, you're assuming that there was always a first cell, there was always a first universe. That assumption can't be made because this universe began. It once wasn't there at all. So that deals with that contention. The third point, could the universe be ultimately created by something else that was created? Or using more philosophical language, could this cosmos that had a beginning, that has a spatio-temporal boundary, could it be created by something else that was also created, or by something else that emerged? Well, for me, this is quite difficult. As Ibn Taymiyyah, the 14th century theologian, said, you have an absurdity because you can't have an infinite regress of causes. For instance, if this universe that began was as a result of another universe that also began, and that universe was as a result of another universe or another material entity that also began, and that material entity or universe was as a result of another material entity or universe, and that goes on forever, will we ever have today's universe? No. It's impossible. And that's why he addresses the idea of who created God. You know, this kind of, I call this an outdated atheist cliche. It's like, I mean, when are we going to grow up in our discussions? I mean, you see it on YouTube, in the books, even Richard Dawkins talks about it. It's like, come on, let's move on with the discussion. Because when you say who created God, which by definition is an uncreated being, which is a paradox in and of itself, but let's entertain it. If you say who created God, then who created the God that created God? Wait a minute. Then who created the God that created the God that created the God? One more second. Who created the God that created the God that created the God that created the God? 1 second, my friend. Who created the God that 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 created the God? If I go on forever, we will never have a God. We will never have a universe. So from this perspective, an infinite regress of causes is impossible. By rational necessity, we end up with the fourth option, which is this cosmos, this universe was created or brought into being by something that wasn't created, and that's something that wasn't brought into being. And by the way, this is not a problem for anybody, theists or atheists. As the philosopher Abraham Varghese says, we both agree on something, theists and atheists, that something must be eternal. It's either the universe or energy or matter, or what created it. Take your choice. But since the universe began, then it must be what created the universe. Now, this doesn't mean God exists. It just means there's an uncreated creator. But when we use our brains, we see that we would derive some attributes that are in line with the divine reality. Namely, he must be powerful. Why? Well, there's 10 to the power of 80 atoms in this universe. Take one atom. Hello, Mr. Atom, how are you doing? I'm just going to split you for a moment, yeah? Say we split this atom, what happens? A release of energy. So we can infer, using an argument from greater reason, that it must be also powerful. It must be knowing or intelligent because we have established laws in the universe. If I were to drop this pen, it falls down because of the law of gravity. And a lawgiver implies an intelligence or knowledge. We know it must be eternal. Why must it be eternal? Because it wasn't brought into being. So you see now, we're deriving some attributes that are in line with the monotheistic tradition on who and what God is. Powerful, knowing, intelligent, eternal.
أم يقولون تقوله بل لا يؤمنون فليأتوا بحديث مثله إن كانوا صادقين أم خلقوا من غير شيء أم هم الخالقون أم خلقوا السماوات والأرض بل لا يوقنون أم عندهم خزائن ربك أم هم المسيطرون أم لهم سلم يستمعون فيه فليأت مستمعهم بسلطان مبين